What's up, guys? Ryan Fee for upswingpoker.com, and what we're going to be doing in this video is looking at opening in tournaments versus cash games. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to use this spreadsheet to give us some rough ideas of the math of the situation. So first we're going to look at cash games. So in a cash game, the size of the pot pre-flop is going to be 1.5 big blinds. There's the big blind and the small blind. And here we have a typical, raise size for a cash game. It's 2.5. We could, this could easily be a 3x raise. For the purpose of this, actually, for the purposes, we're going to make this 3x. I'm changing my mind. We're going to make this a 3x raise. So, if you're raising to 3x pre-flop in a cash game, and in this example, by the way, sorry, just real quick to explain the spreadsheet. So, what this is trying to figure out is your break-even point, meaning how often your opponents need to fold in a given situation for your bet to break even in terms of profitability or expected value. So, use the bet and the size of the pot, and then what makes this one a little bit interesting is that you could also throw in equity because, sometimes your opponents are going to call your bet, and then you'll win that pot some percentage of the time. How do you, how would you measure that? It's like, well, you put in your equity in the called pots, and it sort of gives you a very rough answer. This is really just a tool, a way to think about the way the game works, and mathematically, like how you would move. Oh, okay, I'm going to play a little bit tighter, I'm going to play a little bit looser, and sort of how and why, and what the inflection points and stuff would look like. So in this example, when we get called, we have 25% equity. Again, this is pretty broad. When we raise from, let's say, under the gun, the low jack or the hijack could call, the button could call, the small blind and the big blind could call, everybody could call. Ton of different scenarios that could happen. We're just saying, on average, across all of those boards, we have about 25% equity in those pots, and we would need our opponents to fold 42% of the time to make that bet break even. That's definitely on the higher side. It's possible, but unlikely. I would say we're shooting probably for low 30s. So let's say, what if we had 30% equity? How would we do? Okay, cool. So we notice there's a big inflection between 25 and 30% equity. If we have 30%, we're probably right around the margin. But if we have any less than that, chances are the hand we're picking to raise pre-flop is a little bit too weak. So now we're going to look at tournaments. And the thing about tournaments is that oftentimes they have an ante, which ends up being roughly the size of the big blind. So actually, the size of the pot pre-flop is actually about 2.5. And for the purpose of this one, I don't see why we don't just keep doing a 3 or power 3x raise size. And then you might use a smaller bet, but let's just say we're using 3x. Okay, so what about here if we have 25%? Well, here if we have 25%, never mind. Here, if we have 25%, we only need them to fold 26% of the time. That said, the big blind is going to be getting a much better price, and it's probably going to be folding less. So this is close, but maybe no cigar. What about 27%? 27%, we only need them to be folding 22% of the time. I think that's pretty close, and I think this is probably about what you're going to be wanting. I think low 20s for some really bottom hand equity hands is probably about what you're going to be shooting for. Then if we had 30%, like, okay, they only need to fold 15% of the time. For you to be breaking even, chances are you're going to get 3x raise through from just about any position, 15% of the time. So it's definitely here a little bit more flexibility. Like 30 in the cash game was like we need at least 30. Probably here in the tournament, it's like we need at most 30 to raise, maybe a little bit more. Or a little bit less is okay as well. So how does that, what does that mean? Like, sort of, what is the impact of everything? So what we have here is, wrong way. So what we have on the left here is the under the gun or low jack raise first in range from the Upswing Poker Lab, and what we have on the right is the under the gun raise range from the Upswing Poker Lab for MTTs. So sorry, on the left is cash games. See the title right here, and on the right is the MTT range. And all the hands in red are mandatory raises, basically every time. And then all the hands in pink are sort of optional, game dependent. So as you can see here, there's this whole MTT range is the mandatory range is it looks like it's about as loose as the whole optional range here. In fact, the mandatory range for the MTTs is even looser, and then has this whole layer of these offsuit broadways, weaker suited connectors, suited king, suited queen, that you could consider raising if the game conditions permit as well. Whereas this no ante cash game range is much tighter. The one thing that I think is kind of interesting about this is that I don't even know if this does the situation quite justice, because what we've noticed is that in a lot of the ranges here are made for you guys to be very practical, and what we've noticed is that a lot of the lower stakes games, especially on PokerStars, actually play quite tight pre-flop. So the online cash game ranges in the lab are actually on the looser side. So like I would you'd be hard pressed to play any looser than this. If anything, this is like a little bit looser. I think if Doug or I were playing, maybe 5-10 or 10-20 online, I think we'd probably play even a little bit tighter than these ranges are suggesting, with no ante. So the impact is such that in the MTTs you're just raising more hands. Your default range is going to be wider, and your optional range is going to be wider. And really the effect is because generally you're just you'll pick similar-ish raise sizes. You might raise a little bit bigger in a tournament, but you're just winning more. You're winning more when you steal the blinds, and effectively what happens a lot of the time is like sort of you raise and the big blind calls. A lot of people pick smaller raise sizes in tournaments, and then sort of it's like an act of the raiser and the big blind player sort of chopping up and sort of the expected value, the theoretical amount of chips in there, that sort of every other player used to contribute. So the gist of it is that once that ante gets into play, you're going to play looser. I guess the one final thought is that as you get short-handed, that ante might be smaller, or the tournament structure might make the ante bigger. Maybe the ante's 2 big blinds, or maybe the ante's only half a big blind. All of that stuff is going to greatly impact how much you're raising. So pay attention to the ante size. As it gets bigger, raise more hands. As it gets smaller or it disappears into a cash game, play less hands.